Hello, thanks for checking out my video. Today we are going to be working on our fine motor skills, some visual motor skills, some bilateral coordination, as well as some visual motor integration skills and visual perception skills as we make a paper plate turtle and a paper plate crab with our scissors, our construction paper, the paper plates, some paint, some glue, a paintbrush, and our googly eyes. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my project today. And the first thing I'd like to do is to paint my paper plates their respective colors. So I'm going to start with the turtle and use the green paint and the green paper so I can remove my red paint and my red paper from the area right now from my visual field, clear that out. And I don't need my glue at the moment, so I'm going to put my glue off to the side. And I also don't need my scissors or my googly eyes right now, so I'll put those off to the side as well. And I will select my green paint and one paper plate, and I will turn my plate over so that the back is facing up. And since I'm not using my paper quite yet, maybe I'll put my paper off to the side and come back to this after my plate has dried. So I'll put that off to the side as well. And then I can work on some bilateral coordination just by crossing the midline of my body. I can also work on some bilateral coordination by stabilizing my objects here. So I'm using my non-dominant hand to stabilize the paint as I reach across to get the paint. And I'm also going to use my non-dominant hand to stabilize my paper plate as I paint it. So for me, I'm going to keep my paint on my left side as I'm a right-handed dominant person. And this is also a good chance for us to work on some horizontal pursuits from side to side. So I'm going to keep my paper plate on the far right side of my visual field and my paint on the far left side of my visual field, so that I have to scan back and forth to find each target every time I go from the paint to the plate and back to the paint. As I'm painting, I really want to be aware of how I'm holding my paintbrush. So a lot of people might grab their paintbrush with a fisted grasp, or maybe they'll use like a digital pronate grasp where they're kind of pronating their forearm over. But I'd really like to see the paintbrush oriented in such a fashion that the brush is pointed down and we can see a little bit of this handle here, and it's resting right in the web space between my thumb and my index finger. So there's a little bit of space here. It's offering some nice stability for my paintbrush, which will allow me to then use a grasp like a dynamic tripod grasp, or maybe a lateral tripod grasp like this. And we're really looking to see some good finger control, some good fine motor skills here, maybe a little bit of radial precision as we do our painting. So if you're working on horizontal strokes, we would maybe want to paint horizontally across the page. If you're working on vertical strokes, you would work vertically from top to bottom. And then if you're really just working on some fine motor skills and some radial precision, you can just work on a smaller area and just work on the fine motor skills associated with the radial precision just in that fine, small area right there. So that's something to keep in mind as we start our project. For me, I think I'd like to work on maybe a little bit of horizontal strokes and some vertical strokes, and maybe some intersecting lines. So I'm going to reach across my body to my non-dominant hand side. I'm going to stabilize my paint cup with my non-dominant hand, and I'm going to get a little bit of paint on my paintbrush. And my first stroke, I'm going to come back over and stabilize my paper plate now. My first stroke is going to be a vertical stroke, And then I'm going to scan back over to my paint, stabilize my paint cup, dip it back in the paint, scan back over to my target, and now I'm going to make an intersecting line with a horizontal stroke. So again, this is a good way not only to practice some pre-writing motor skills, but also to work on some bilateral coordination as we're working across our body from either side. We're developing some good visual motor skills, locating each target, and we're also working on some bilateral coordination here as we use the intersecting lines. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the painting of my turtle shell. So as I was painting my paper plate, I was working on my vertical strokes, my horizontal strokes, some intersecting lines, and then I had an opportunity to work on some ascending and descending arcs. So these are the same motor skills that you'll use if you are practicing some shape drawing. Maybe you're drawing a circle, or maybe you're doing a little bit more of the pre-writing strokes just with some of these nice ascending and descending arcs all the way around the rim of the turtle shell. And then I had one location here where I really needed to use a little bit more fine motor precision and some radial precision as I painted the small area here. So if you need to work on some radial precision and some fine motor skills, maybe just isolate a small area for your child to paint within. Now that I have my green paper plate, I think I'd like to put this off to the side to dry for just a minute, and maybe I will work on my crab shell while my turtle shell dries. For my crab shell, I think what I'd like to do is to cut my paper plate in half, and I'll use the flat side for the bottom side of the crab, so the feet will come out of the flat side, and then this round top portion here will be the top part of the crab shell. So I need to cut my paper plate in half, and we can start by using some visual cues so that your student can then trace along, say, a dotted line, and that they can get a little bit of practice either with a horizontal pen stroke this way, or if we wanted to turn our paper plate, you can have practice with a vertical pen stroke. So because our crab is going to be red, I'm going to use just a red marker, and I will get some visual cues going just along the middle portion of our paper plate so that I can go ahead and trace along the dotted line and then cut out along the line. So now that I have my dotted lines on my paper plate, cutting the plate in half should be a little bit easier if we complete these lines here. So I'm going to use the same red marker. I'm going to practice my visual motor integration skills as I locate my visual cues to then trace along the line. I'm stabilizing my object with my non-dominant hand. I really have a nice dynamic tripod grasp, or maybe a lateral tripod grasp. Even a grasp with extended fingers, that will be good for today. And again, I'm working on my visual motor integration skills as I go dot to dot and trace along the dotted line. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It's just a new visual cue for us to use as we take our scissors and cut the paper plate in half. Now that I have my visual cue on my paper plate, I'm ready to cut my plate in half. So this is a good chance for us to work on some fine motor skills with our scissors, as well as some visual motor integration skills as we cut along the line, and also some bilateral coordination skills as I'm holding my plate with my non-dominant hand, and I'm going to go ahead and proceed to cut along this line. staying on the line here within a reasonable amount. And now that I have two halves, I can actually make, if I was so inclined, two crabs. But for the sake of this activity, because I only have enough googly eyes for one crab and one turtle, I will take this other half of the paper plate and just put it off to the side. Now I'm ready to paint my paper plate. For this one, I think what I'd like to do is to work on some vertical pursuits. So I'm going to put my paper plate crab shell right here on the bottom portion of my visual field, and I'm going to place my red paint cup at the top portion of my visual field so that my eyes have to scan back and forth from each target on a vertical sort of fashion here. So I will also work on my bilateral coordination using two hands at the midline of my body. One hand to stabilize my object, the other hand for functional use with the utensil. And because our crab shell is smaller than our turtle shell, we'll have a smaller area to paint within, which will encourage a little bit more fine motor use as we paint. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on my painting now using some good fine motor skills here within this small area. Maybe I'll have some small brush strokes, or if you'd like to continue working on your vertical strokes, you can do that, or your horizontal strokes, you can do that with some intersecting lines. But for me, I think I'd like to maybe just do a little bit of everything. So I'm going to do some intersecting lines, then I'm going to have this small area here that I need to paint within. I'll be using my fine motor skills for that portion. And then I would also like to work on my ascending and descending arcs. So this is just another opportunity for me to practice all of my pre-writing strokes so that when it comes time for me to write letters or to copy shapes, that I have these skills already in my bag here. So now I have just a small space left, and this is going to require a little bit of problem solving. I'm going to turn my crab shell around to my dominant hand side so I can finish this up here. And now that I'm finished painting my my crab shell, I can go ahead and work on some of the finer details if I'd like. And then once I'm done with that, I can put it off to the side so that it can dry. And as the crab shell dries, I will grab my turtle shell and we can start working on that. So as I'm working with my turtle shell, I no longer need my red paint. I can put my red paint off to the side to clear up my visual field. And I will locate my green paper. And we have about 3 sheets of the paper here. That should be plenty. Really what I want to do here is just cut out some simple shapes, just a rough cut. It doesn't have to be perfect. They can be small little rectangles, maybe little circles or ovals, your choice. But we need to make 4 legs, a head, and a tail. So to make this a little bit easier for myself, I think what I'd like to do is to just practice some drawing of these shapes before I cut them out. So I'll put the turtle shell up here to the top. And what I think I'd like to do here is now I'm going to make 4 small rectangles for the feet, maybe a slightly oval shape for the head, and perhaps a triangle for the tail. So for this one, I'm going to use my green paper. I'm going to lay it down kind of horizontally across the page. I'm going to give myself or my student a visual cue, and then they can practice their visual motor integration skills just by tracing along this dotted line here, so that we have this as 1 foot, and then I'll do the same over here so that my student can trace, again, tracing along the dotted line, getting some good visual motor integration skills working there, adding more visual cues so that my student can trace along the dotted line again. And then for our last foot, I'll do the same so that we are consistent with our expectations. And that'll work for me. So now that I have my rectangles and my 4 vertical lines that I just completed there, I'm ready to go ahead and cut these out. So I want to make sure that, again, I'm using some good bilateral coordination, using my non-dominant hand. I'm working on some postural stability here as I raise my paper up above from the tabletop here. My arm is floating, so really I'm having to use my deltoid muscles to stabilize my arm. If your child does not have that kind of postural stability with the deltoids, this task might be really difficult to do. So we can provide a little bit of stability on the forearm, underneath their forearm, maybe at the wrist level, so that they don't have to worry as much about the stability portion. They can just isolate their fine motor skills. And the same can be said for the scissor hand as well. The dominant hand side, we can also support our student under the forearm, about the wrist level, for the same exact reasons, that they can focus on their fine motor skills. But if you are working on some gross motor skills and some postural stability, you may want to encourage your student to hold the paper up above the tabletop and use their own arm strength to stabilize their arm and subsequently the paper, which is what I'm doing now. And then I'm going to use my visual motor integration skills and some fine motor skills to cut along this vertical line. And as I do this, I'm creating little legs for my turtle. And now I am on my last one, and then I'll be done with this portion. And I can move on to my triangle for my tail, and I can also make the oval shape for my head. So I'm going to use this extra piece of paper here, putting my turtle legs off to the side, and then I'm going to maybe provide the same visual cues along this paper. Maybe I'll flip it over so it's not as busy in my visual field. And I will make the same visual cues here along in this space here, maybe an oval shape, so that my student can then trace along those visual cues to, again, practice some good pre-writing shapes. So I'm ready to add my visual cues now, and I can make my turtle head whatever shape I'd like. I'm going to do an oval shape, and I have enough visual cues out there. I'm stabilizing my paper with my non-dominant hand. I have a nice tripod grasp with my dominant hand side, with my marker, in this case, resting nicely in the web space between my thumb and my index finger, much like I did with my paintbrush. So this is really going to isolate my fine motor skills, and now I'm practicing my visual motor integration as I trace along these visual cues to make an oval shape for my turtle head. Now that I have my turtle head drawn on the paper, I'm ready to practice my visual motor integration skills and my bilateral coordination skills again by cutting out this shape here. When we have rounded shapes, what we're looking for is really some good pronation of the forearm here with our non-dominant hand side, maybe a little bit of deviation at the wrist to help cut out the rounded shape so that our scissor hand doesn't have to go all the way around, which is really impossible to do. We're using both hands together to assist cutting out this round shape. So I'm going to just cut along this line, both hands working together, turning over my left hand, deviating a little bit at the wrist, pronating my right hand also so that I can use my scissors to cut around this round shape here. And once I've completed that, I will put it off to the side, clean out my visual field, and I'm going to make a triangle for the tail. So I have some nice visual cues here on my paper that I will trace along to make my turtle tail. So I'm going to do that now, tracing along my visual cues here. I'm getting some nice diagonal pen strokes from top to bottom and a nice horizontal pen stroke across the bottom. And now that I have my triangle on my paper, I'm ready to cut it out. So again, we're using some good bilateral coordination skills here with our non-dominant hand to stabilize the paper. We have correctly initiated a grasp and oriented our scissors correctly. Now we are just using some good bilateral coordination skills here to rotate the paper around. And once we have our paper correctly oriented, we are able to make a triangle. So I have an extra piece of paper which I don't need. I can just put this off to the side for another project. And I will begin gluing my shapes onto my paper plate, which I'll actually be using this side to glue my my limbs, the legs and the arms and the head and the tail. And I think what I'd like to do is to use some glue because I'd like to work on my grip and pinch strength. If you want to work on some fine motor skills, the same fine motor skills that you would use for writing, you might want to use a glue stick because this is really going to give us another opportunity to practice our radial precision and to use a utensil here that has a cylindrical shape to it, much like any other writing instrument. So I'm going to use my glue because, again, I want to work on my grip and pinch strength. As I'm working with my glue, I have an opportunity here to either squeeze a little bit of glue on exactly where I want my glue to go, or I can continue some gross motor skills and some postural stability skills, really stabilizing my arm in the air above the tabletop, and then using my gross motor skills to maybe glue around in a circle, and then you can just attach your pieces along that way. Or you can add a small visual cue of where you want each little dot of glue to go. So I'm going to do that. So this will be my head, this will be my tail, and then I'll have more spaces here for my arms and legs respectively. And this will give our students a visual target that they have to locate and accurately put glue within. So this is just another great opportunity for us to work on some visual perception skills and, of course, our grip and pinch strength. So now that I have my visual cues on my paper plate, I will go ahead and put a dot of glue, or maybe a little bit more than a dot of glue, in each one of my circles. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, stabilizing my plate with my non-dominant hand, squeezing out just the right amount of glue. So I'm using some good graded muscle force here to squeeze out just the right amount. I'm not squeezing out too much or too little. And I'm locating each visual target and putting just a little bit of glue in each visual target. And I'm scanning around the whole time. I'm using some really great visual motor skills to scan around my entire paper plate here, looking for each visual target. Now that I have my glue within my visual target, I am ready to begin gluing my head, tail, and limbs onto the back of the paper plate. So I'm going to start up here at the top with my head, and I'm actually going to use, let's see here, I'm going to put the side that still has a little bit of the black marker around it. I think I'm going to put it facing up so that when we actually look at it, you can still see a little bit of that kind of outline shape there. Either way is fine. So I'm using a good pincer grasp here with my paper, and maybe a little bit of shifting involved between my thumb and my index finger as I'm manipulating my paper. I'm also going to stabilize my paper plate with my non-dominant hand. I'm going to locate my visual target and press down with the appropriate amount of force here to place the head on the turtle. And maybe I'll kind of squish it around a little bit to get all that glue on there. And after I'm done with that, I think what I'd like to do is put my tail on next. So maybe I'll get a little bit more glue on here, because that part didn't really stick as well as I had hoped. Oop, that's maybe too much glue, but we'll see. And now I'm going to go ahead and put my tail on. And once I have that, maybe I'll smush it around a little bit, get some of that glue all over the triangle. And now once I have that one on, I can move on to my legs. So again, maybe I want to move my glue and kind of smush it around a little bit here so it sticks on the back of my legs here at this point. And I'm just going to go around and do the same thing for all 4 of the legs. Now that I have my head, tail, and legs attached, I can flip it over and give it a look and see how it looks there. And I'm pretty satisfied with how that looks. So I think what I'd like to do is maybe allow this glue just a little time to set up and dry. So I'm going to put this off to the side, and I'm going to do the exact same thing with my crab, except this time we don't need to make any extra shapes other than rectangles. So we're going to use our same technique here. We're going to add visual cues along our paper as it sits horizontally. And we are just going to make these visual cues here and then use our visual motor integration skills to trace along each line that we will then cut out to make the legs for the crab. So I think most crab have maybe 10 legs. So we can do as many as we want to. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to fit all 10 legs on this paper plate unless we maybe make them a little bit thinner. So you can go ahead and make thin legs here. We'll cut along each one, or you can just do as many legs as you want to. This is all just for practice and for fun. We don't have to be anatomically correct with our crab, so it doesn't really matter how many legs you have. I'm going to try to squeeze 10 on there, so I'm going to try to use just these real thin strips here. And once I complete my visual cues, putting my visual cues on the paper, that would be a good chance for your student to then trace along those lines. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. Now that I have my vertical lines on my paper, I'm ready to begin cutting out my legs, which I will do with some good stability with my non-dominant hand. Again, stabilizing at the wrist if if your student needs you to support them a little bit on their forearm to isolate their fine motor skills, that's okay. And then we are just going to cut along each line here until we complete all of these legs, and then we can glue them onto our paper. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this portion now. Now that I have my crab legs cut out, I want to begin gluing them onto the back of our crab shell here. So the top portion is nice and dry. Flip it over. And what I want to do is add a lot of glue here because it didn't work out so well for me with the turtle shell, just putting a little bit of glue. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to load up on the glue on the bottom portion, and then we're just going to kind of randomly position these crab legs in any which way you want. They don't all have to hang kind of vertically. That would be an interesting crab. So they're going to hang a little diagonal, maybe a little bit like this, maybe a little bit kind of wonky or a little bit off to the side. That's totally fine. That seems like a pretty natural sort of crab leg there. So I'm going to make sure that I stabilize my paper plate with my non-dominant hand. And I'm going to practice my grip and pinch strength here with my glue bottle to squeeze out just the right amount. So again, I'm not going to be frugal with my glue distribution here. I'm really going to go for it. And I'm going to make sure that I get enough glue on the sides. I'm going to spread out this glue a little bit here all over this back portion so that we can firmly affix our crab legs to the shell. Now that I have my glue on the back of the crab shell, I'm ready to begin placing my legs onto the crab shell, which I will do now. So I didn't quite use all of my crab legs, but that's okay because occasionally crabs will lose their legs, so the fact that I have 9 legs on my crab is really not a problem. I'm going to go ahead and just give it a quick flip over just to see what it looks like here. It looks like it's going to work out for me, so I'm going to put this off to the side so it can dry a little better, and I will go back to my turtle, which has done a pretty good job of drying. And at this point, we are almost done. So I think what I'd like to do now is to find my googly eyes. And I'd like to glue my googly eyes onto my turtle head, which I will do with just a couple drops of glue. And right there. And then I'm using my fine motor skills, a good pincer grasp with these googly eyes, some good shifting involved. And I'm going to just place one eye on this drop of glue here. I'm going to use my pincer grasp again with some good shifting to place my second googly eye on the second drop of glue. And once I've completed that, I will put this off to the side to dry a little bit so that later I can come back and draw a shell on it if I want to. A little pattern, maybe like a grid pattern for the shell. But in the meantime, I'm going to put this off to the side so it can dry. And I will go back to my crab and do the same thing with my crab. So for my crab, I want to make sure that I'm correctly orienting my animal here with the feet on the bottom. And again, I'm going to go back to my glue. Just put a couple drops of glue right about there. Should be fine. And once the glue is on there, I'm ready to get my googly eyes. Get some nice pincer grasp going there. And just place one eye there on that drop of glue and the second eye on this drop of glue. So for the crab, I think we are pretty much done. I think the only thing missing from this crab is a nice happy face, because this looks like a pretty happy crab even though it just lost a leg and only has 9, but it's still a happy crab. And I'm going to put this one off to the side because we're done with this, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to do a little bit of pre-writing strokes with my turtle. So again, I want to draw a little bit more detail. You don't have to draw a little bit more detail, but I'm going to give my turtle a nice grid pattern. So I'm going to do probably about 3 vertical strokes and probably about 3 horizontal strokes all the way across our surface here. And then I will complete this, and we will have a turtle with a nice shell on it. So again, we've been working on our fine motor skills with the glue, with the scissors, with our writing instruments. We've been working on our visual motor integration skills, tracing along our visual cues if we had them. We've been working on our visual motor integration skills by cutting along our lines. And we've really been doing a lot of great bilateral coordination skills just from our placement of our objects from either the left side to the right side and stabilizing our objects with our non-dominant hand. So I hope you had fun with this activity, and I hope you found it useful. Please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions on how to implement these strategies with your students.